If you look at the compounding crises piling up around us, it is entirely normal to feel a crushing sense of exhaustion. The weight of it all pushes many of us into a quiet psychological retreat. We start to look at a broken world and accept that things are simply the way they are. The poet Diane di Prima diagnosed this specific kind of surrender. She called it a war against the imagination. When we look at systemic suffering and tell ourselves it is inevitable, we are not describing reality. We are unconsciously living inside a boundary someone else built for us. We can track how that boundary gets built. This diagram maps out a predictable cycle of civilizational decay, first identified in the 14th century. It flows from initial social cohesion to prosperity, which insulates those in power, erodes cohesion, and ends in collapse. But civilizations that solved this cycle were systematically wiped out by militarized neighbors. This dynamic is known as a multipolar trap. In an environment without central rules, any society that chooses restraint and cooperation guarantees its own destruction by neighbors who choose extraction and violence. The same logic that fueled ancient conquests now powers modern arms races and the accelerating extraction of our natural world. The total erasure of those peaceful, cooperative civilizations did something devastating. It deprived us of the proof of concept that alternative social structures are even possible. We cannot study those societies because the historical record was written entirely by the survivors of organized violence. Our belief that human beings are inherently selfish and destructive is a massive case of survivorship bias. We inherited the history of what won, instead of the history of what actually worked. Today, that trap no longer requires physical violence to sustain itself. It relies on colonizing the modern mind. Its primary enforcement mechanism is a deep, chronic exhaustion. It keeps us locked in a perpetual state of survival. When the threat response locks in the on position, blood flow diverts from the prefrontal cortex. Circuits for planning go dark, leaving the brain purely reactive. Poverty, trauma, and isolation act as constant inputs, locking populations in this neurological loop. A nervous system crushed by chronic survival cannot map out a new civilization. Its entire biological bandwidth is consumed by immediate reaction. Di Prima wrote that the starvation of the imagination is death. That is a measurable biological event, not a metaphor. When we hear people excuse profound systemic horrors by saying, "That is simply the way things are," we are not hearing genuine indifference. We are hearing deep exhaustion. Believing that the world can change requires accepting a share of the responsibility for changing it. That is a massive weight, and a traumatized nervous system cannot safely bear it. The structural trap achieves its total victory by making us too biologically exhausted to even conceive of our own escape. Choosing to get well is not a retreat into the self. It is a material contribution to our collective capacity. Healing is a biological necessity. You need a regulated nervous system to engage in complex systems thinking without burning out. We can visualize this transition to collective capacity here. A single illuminated node connects to others, mapping out a concept we call health is infrastructure. Every single person who shifts from surviving to thriving adds a capable node to a broader network of resistance. The same coordination failure that drives an arms race drives the patterns of self-destruction in a single human life. The scale changes, but the mechanics of the trap remain identical. Breaking this trap does not require waiting for top-down saviors. It requires a distributed network of actively healing collaborators. It takes educators expanding minds, clinicians repairing nervous systems, and artists generating proof that alternative worlds can exist. Neutrality is impossible here. Every action we take either reinforces the limits of the ready-made world or it expands the boundaries of the possible. If you refuse to accept despair as the final answer, bring your grief, reclaim your health, find others doing the exact same work. The ultimate act of defiance against a history written by violence is choosing to remain fiercely curious about the solution.